comrades, if I'm ready. It's very difficult to follow Saeed at the best of times, but after that detailed description he's given, there's an awful lot that's been said, and it's very hard to know where I could fit in. The only thing I do want to say to him is that it is true that the Celts are back in Shannon, but sadly, but unfortunately, Shannon's full of an awful lot of other people that shouldn't be there at all, and that's, of course, the forces of American imperialism, which pass through Shannon on a far too regular basis. So let's try and make them a rare breed on the shores of the Shannon as well. I want to thank the organisers for inviting me here today. I'm not sure what I can come and add to the discussion. I really wanted to come and hear much of it, but there's two things that kept me back. One is I have urgent family business with a young grandchild which I had to deal with, and the second is far more important than that. That's the fact that Wales are playing Ireland at the moment, and the last I heard was that Wales were leading, so sorry to bring you that news. But no, but I wanted to be here because the story of Malcolm X is a story that needs to be told to all people who are struggling for freedom, be it in colonial countries or countries that were victims of colonialism like Ireland, or be it even in metropolitan countries where there's a struggle to build socialist or democratic or progressive forces. This platform is quite an impressive platform, I have to say. I'm looking forward to hear from Sister MacLochlainn shortly. I was in Gaza fairly recently when Leila was visiting Gaza, and I was supposed to meet her for lunch. Unfortunately, we were scheduled to go through Rafah at the same time as she was coming in the other direction, and there's no flexibility on the Gaza crossing, so I had to miss the opportunity to have lunch with her. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what she has to say today. Of course, we have Bernadette, who's walked out of my speech, but I'm not bitter. But Bernadette is somebody that we've all got our favourite memories of, and I'm sure somebody has mentioned the story of when she went to Chicago and Mayor Daley presented her at the time of the Battle of the Bauxite, which was in my city. At the time of the civil rights struggle there, Bernadette went to Chicago, and when she was in Chicago, she was presented by Mayor Daley with the keys of the freedom of Chicago, and she immediately took it and gave it to the Black Panthers. So it's a good example of how it's being a Derry man. My favourite memory of Bernadette, of course, is her intervention in Westminster when Reginald Maudling, that vile piece of garbage that purported to be a British minister here, when he stood up and lied about the massacre of people in my city on Bloody Sunday, Bernadette could bear no more, and she rushed across and made a parliamentary intervention, the technical term of which I believe is she tore his face off. But anyway, and of course, my brother and comrade Saib here, it's always good to see Saib, and it's good to share a platform with him. I was going to say it makes it a very auspicious platform, but with Saib here I have to say it's a suspicious one as well. So he won't mind me saying that. Malcolm X, the big thing about Malcolm X to me, the one thing that sticks with Malcolm X to me is because my history is one of coming through the Irish civil rights movement and coming involved in politics in that way. But Malcolm X taught me a very good lesson very early on, just by his name, because at first I didn't know why he was called Malcolm X, and you wonder why he got the name X. And when you understand that he took that to emphasise the fact that imperialism had robbed him of his identity and robbed him of his name, and so he used the name X to demonstrate what imperialism had done. And that was in a very simple way, and these are always the best, aren't they? The simple ways of explaining what imperialism does to you, because what it does, it takes away your culture, it takes away your identity, makes you non-people, and then it moves in and it takes your country and takes your wealth and does what it wants with you. I come from the city of Derry, as has been mentioned already, and in a way we can summarise this too, because it was my city. We will be told by people that the name of my city is a decision that falls with the British government, who seem to think that they have the right to decide what we should call my city, and they call my city Londonderry, despite the fact that nobody on the island of Ireland calls it Londonderry unless it's a unionist wanting to make a political point, because most unionists that I know, when I speak to them day in day out, talk about Derry. But it's a British, and it's a British imperialist imposition, and it was about seizing the territory and taking ownership of the space. And so, that removal of identity is an important part of colonisation, and it's also an important part, therefore, of anti-colonisation or of liberation, that you stand up and struggle for your language, for your culture, and stand up for your nation. And Malcolm, of course, and you see in his development, was one of those people in the black community that was standing up for the black people and making sure that black people were proud of their identity, could learn to be proud of their identity, because if you're proud of your identity, you'll fight for your rights. When you're browbeaten and beaten down, you can't fight for your rights, so it's important to do that. And so we see the struggle with Malcolm X through his political activities to recognise the black people and for what their place is in society. And some of the people that were inspired by him, a very good friend of mine who's sadly no longer with us, Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture of the Black Panthers, was the person who actually devised the phrase Black Power, popularised it initially. And it was so important that concept be brought out. I like mentioning Stokely, apart from the fact he was a friend of mine, because he was from Montserrat. And being from Montserrat, it's no surprise he was of Irish extraction. His mother was from Montserrat, Mabel, who came to Gerry on some occasion. And Stokely has, coming through that, he learned the importance of standing up for his own culture, and he brought that to the black movement that he joined. So my earliest development, I mentioned earlier, was in the struggle for Irish civil rights, and it was happening in a world where everything was exciting, because at the time, there were student revolts happening all across Europe. We were just after the Cuban Revolution. We had the struggle in Vietnam was reaching a height, and the Tet Offensive was a major uprising by the Vietnamese forces, who took the war right into the middle of Saigon, as it was called then, and challenged the Americans and their South Vietnamese puppets, challenged them right in the heart of what would be their capital. Of course, we saw the victory in Libya, where Muammar Gaddafi came to power, and where the wealth was, the oil was taken back from the Libyan people and taken from the imperialist powers and taken from the big oil companies, who all have got that back now since the so-called revolution. But imperialism, continues, going all around us. I could see these struggles against imperialism, but I could also see imperialism continuing to strike out. And I could see what they were doing in my country, I could see what they're doing in the streets of Gerry and in the streets of Belfast and other places. But I could also see what America did in Chile against the democratically elected government of Allende. I could see right across the world, I could see imperialism on the one hand and freedom-loving people on the other. And the one thing that I learnt was that we could never, Ireland could never, ever, ever be free in a world that oppressed and occupied and enslaved other people. And we needed to understand that, because we would not be able to sustain our freedom if we lived in a world without friends who also valued freedom. So when I looked around the world, the people that, at that time they were inspiring to me, and it's a remarkable period it was. Che Guevara, who was to be murdered sadly in the mid-60s, Fidel Castro himself, Camille Torres, a priest in South America, was involved in liberation theology. When you look at singers, there were people like Bob Dylan, who were singing about the wars and singing folk songs, which were meant to inspire young people in the struggle for peace. But there was also people that I would often listen to at that time, and I didn't fully appreciate them until later in this period. But Paul Robeson, tremendous black activist and leader in America, a singer who became a huge Hollywood star in his time. He was also a professional footballer and a professional barrister. But despite the fact that this man was a giant in entertainment, a tremendous singer, black singer, he fell victim to the witch hunts, the Cartier witch hunts in America, and died in poverty and died in terrible conditions with mental health difficulties, all brought upon by the isolation the American state brought, where they withdrew his passport and wouldn't allow him to leave. There was Cassius Clay was a figure when I was young. We watched. I remember being brought out of bed to watch him win his title fight, and then I heard him change his name to Muhammad Ali sometime later. And then, of course, I saw him being jailed by the American state, despite the fact that he was world champion heavyweight boxer, but jailed for failing to go to Vietnam, refusing to go to Vietnam. And he summed it up for me very, very well. And I always remember when he said that he, as a black man, was not going to go to kill the yellow man on behalf of the white man. And tremendous example of international solidarity. He did 5 years in jail and was banned from, or a number of years in jail and was banned title banned for his title for 5 years after that. I just wanted to just move on a wee bit just to say that this is the period in which I was brought up in. Ireland was between two worlds. Ireland was part of Europe, but we were also part of the third world. Malcolm X expressed that. I saw on one occasion that he wrote that the Irish were the blackest people of Europe, and that's something that we should continue to be proud of, because we were not the white man that was meant to be okay. We were treated as if we were what we were with the oppressed, just the oppressed people. We were the black people, the black white people, as it were. I always remember somebody shouted in Gerry in one of the big marches that we were the white Negroes of Europe. Sort of summed it up. It's a difficult word to use nowadays, but I think people understand in the context. But here we're gathered in Belfast, and I just want to say a couple of words about Belfast, because there's no better place in Ireland to commemorate Malcolm X. Because Ireland has Belfast has a very proud tradition. The slave trade, whilst money was made from the slave trade in Belfast, in ancillary trade, the slave trade never took hold here. No ships that were involved in transporting slaves were allowed to operate in Belfast. And it was as a result of the liberal democratic forces around the Presbyterian Church and around the United Irishmen and among the women's movement that was there at that time, who opposed the oppression of black people, opposed the slave trade. Thomas Russell, who was one of the first librarians of the Linden Hall Library, would refuse to eat sugar and sweetmeats because they were an ostentatious demonstration of the robbery of the black man that was happening with the slave trade. Mary Ann McCracken, the sister of Henry Joy McCracken, a woman struggling for her rights as well, but she struggled against slavery and was involved in the women's campaign against slavery. And one of the things she did was she advertised in the Belfast newsletter that any slave who managed to escape and couldn't make his way to Belfast or make his way to any of her colleagues, they would buy his freedom and make sure that he was free. Thomas McCabe was a jeweller who was a United Irishman, and there was a meeting in Belfast where somebody attempted to set up a slaving company, and when the book was open for people to make the subscriptions, Thomas McCabe was the first one forward, and he wrote on the first line, "May God eternally damn any man who puts his name in this book." And nobody else put their name in the book, and the slave trade never took hold in Belfast. We can be proud of that. But let's not... I just finished by bringing it today to say, let's not sit back and say what a wonderful history we had, what a wonderful position we had. We have a responsibility to make sure that Ireland lives up to those traditions. We're no better than anybody else. I want to say this, the Irish people are no better than anybody else, and we've never asked for more than anybody else. We demand equality, we are equal, and we insist upon that. But the fact is that had not been for the accidents of history, maybe Ireland would have been ahead of Britain in terms of economic development. Maybe we'd have had the empire, they'd have been the oppressed people. That's not how it happened. And one of the things that we can say is that because it didn't happen, it has political effects in the political culture here in Ireland. And it's something, I don't know if you remember the Monty Python film, Life of Brian, but there's the argument of what did the Romans ever bring us? People can talk about the British, what did the British ever bring us? They say they brought us the roads, but of course we know we built the roads. They say they brought us healthcare, but of course we know it's Irish nurses and Irish doctors who were the backbone of the health service for many years, other colonial peoples now. And of course, they say they brought us universities and education, but we know it was actually the Irish diaspora that moved out across after the Dark Ages that reintroduced learning across Europe. But one thing Britain did give, and we should be grateful for, and I would say this, let's be grateful to Britain, because by occupying us, they prevented us becoming a modern, imperialist, colonial power like the rest of Europe. They made us special in Europe, so let's revel in that specialness, let's revel in our anti-imperialist history, and let's move on to freedom for our country, but let's stand up for people around the world and stand as a progressive beacon. Our Irish government in the south has been a disgrace when it's come to many of these issues. The touchstone issue for today, and it's no accident Leila's speaking next, is the situation in Gaza and the situation in Palestine as a whole. Let's make sure that our Irish government does the right thing now. In Europe, we should stand up firmly and demand the special trading arrangements with Israel are scrapped. That must happen. We must take action against the nest of spies that purports to be an embassy in Dublin, where Irish passports were stolen and were forged and were used to murder a political activist belonging to Hamas. Let's make sure that our government stands up for Ireland, stands up for Ireland's best interest in Europe, but does that by making sure that we are friends and friendly with all the oppressed people of this earth. Let's not forget our history. Let's go forward, and in anti-imperialist unity, let's go forward and struggle. Freedom for Ireland, unity for Ireland, and freedom for the people of the world, and in particular now, freedom for the people of Palestine.
Thanks, Gerry. And